You knelt down in the dirt behind the scout hall on a Saturday morning in 1974 and you primed the engine with your thumb over the intake and you flicked the prop and it coughed and died and you flicked it again and it caught with a sound like tearing calico and settled into a hard, flat, furious buzz that filled the whole oval. There was no battery. There was no glow plug. There was just you, a screwdriver, a bottle of fuel that smelled like a workshop and a hospital at the same time, and a little grey engine no bigger than a matchbox that ran on nothing but compression and spite. You were 10 years old. Your dad was crouched beside you with his hands on his knees, not touching anything, just watching, because he knew what this was. That engine was a Taipan Tyro 1.9 cubic centimeters, and it was the first real machine you ever owned. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us what state you grew up in, because this one belongs to every kid in Australia who ever smelled ether on a Saturday morning. The hobby shop window. You did not find the Taipan Tyro in a Christmas catalogue. There was no glossy double-page spread with a smiling boy in front of a P-51. You found it in the window of the model shop, the one 2 doors down from the newsagent, with a bell on the door and a strip of flypaper hanging in the corner that had been there since 1968. The window display never changed much. A few balsa kits gone yellow in the sun. A row of dusty trophies from a club meet nobody could remember. And on a little wooden stand in the middle, an engine. Grey crackle finish crankcase. A compression screw sticking up out of the top like a tiny brass thumb. A silver spinner nut catching whatever light came through the glass. You used to walk past that window on the way to the milk bar and you would stop every single time, hands cupped against the glass, and just look at it. You did not need a page number. You did not need a catalogue at all. You knew exactly which shop, exactly which window, exactly which shelf. Every boy in every town in this country in the 60s and 70s knew where the Taipan lived. Because it was not imported. It was not American. It was ours. Built here, in South Australia, by blokes who understood that a kid in Broken Hill or Bendigo or Bunbury did not have access to whatever the Yanks were flying, and did not much care, because what he had was better anyway. It was cheap enough that your paper round covered it in a month. It was tough enough to survive you. And it started on compression, not electricity, which meant no batteries to go flat, no glow plugs to burn out, nothing but a screwdriver and your own 2 fingers standing between you and flight. You saved. You did odd jobs for the old bloke next door mowing his nature strip. You went without the Saturday matinee for 3 weeks running. You counted the money out on your bedspread every Friday night, coins in little stacks, and worked out how many more weeks it would take, and every Saturday you'd walk past the shop just to check it was still there, still sitting on its little wooden stand, because in the back of your mind you were half convinced somebody else's kid was going to beat you to it. Nobody did. And on a cold morning in April, you walked into that shop with a fistful of coins and put them on the counter, and the man behind it did not even need to ask which one. Building it. You built it on the kitchen table because the garage was too cold that week and your mum let it slide just this once. Newspaper spread out under the parts like it was surgery. Balsa fuselage, tissue-covered wings, a little tin of banana oil dope that smelled sweet enough to make you dizzy if you leaned in too close. And the engine itself, sitting in its box wrapped in a bit of oiled rag, heavier in your hand than you expected for something so small. Your dad had never touched a Taipan before, but he had grown up with a soldering iron in one hand and a spanner in the other, and that was enough. He showed you how to bolt the engine to the bearers with the 2 long bolts that ran right through the firewall. He showed you the compression screw and explained, in the plain way he explained everything, that this engine did not need a spark or a glow plug at all. It ran on compression ignition, the same principle as the diesel truck that delivered the milk, just shrunk down small enough to sit in your palm. He showed you the fuel line running back to the little aluminium tank, and the smell that came off the fuel bottle when he unscrewed the cap, ether, kerosene, a whisper of castor oil, sharp enough to make your eyes water and somehow wonderful anyway. He let you hold the screwdriver. He let you thread the little brass control horn onto the elevator arm and get it wrong twice before you got it right. He did not take the screwdriver back off you when your hand slipped and the blade skated across the balsa and left a scratch you can probably still see if you ever found that fuselage today. He just said, "Have another go," and you did. That was the whole point of it, even though nobody said so out loud. The plane was not really the point. The compression screw was not really the point. The point was a father teaching a son that things break and you fix them, that patience is not a virtue you're born with but one you build one strip screw at a time, and that a job done slow and right beats a job done fast and wrong every single time. When the plane sat finished on the kitchen table that Sunday evening, wings gleaming under the dope, engine catching the light from the window over the sink, your dad wiped his hands on a rag and looked at it for a long moment and said, "That'll fly." And you carried those 2 words around in your chest for the rest of your life. The first start. You are not likely to forget the first time you started a diesel model engine, because it does not start like anything else you will ever own. There is no glow plug. There is no battery clip. There is a compression screw at the top of the head, and a contrapiston underneath it, and the whole trick of starting a Taipan lies in getting that screw wound down to exactly the right point where the fuel-air mixture in the cylinder compresses hard enough to ignite itself, the way diesel fuel ignites in a truck engine, just from the heat of being squeezed. You set the plane on the grass behind the scout hall. Your dad held the tail. You primed the engine the way he'd shown you, thumb over the intake, flicking the prop over 3 or 4 times to draw a bit of fuel into the cylinder, and the smell of it hit you straight away, that ether and kerosene smell that every diesel flyer in this country would recognize blindfolded 50 years later. You wound the compression screw down half a turn, the way the man in the shop had told you. You put your finger on the prop. You flicked it. Nothing. You flicked it again. A cough, a puff of blue-white smoke, and it died. Your dad reached over without a word and gave the compression screw another quarter turn. You flicked it a 3rd time and the whole engine came alive under your finger with a bark that turned into a scream, that hard flat buzz that had no equal anywhere else in your childhood, and the prop vanished into a silver blur and the plane strained against your dad's grip on the tail like it wanted to leave the ground right then and there. No waiting, no ceremony. A magpie 2 trees over took off in fright. Somebody's kelpie started barking 3 yards down. And you stood there with your heart going like a hammer and the smell of ether and burnt castor oil settling on your hands. And you understood, the way you only understand a handful of things in your entire life without being told, that something had just changed permanently. The first flight. You backed out to the middle of the control lines with the handle in your fist, palm sweating, the engine screaming behind you loud enough that you could feel it in your back teeth. Your dad let go of the tail. "Go," he said. And the little plane rolled forward across the grass and lifted. And for about 4 seconds it was the most perfect thing that had ever happened to you in your entire short life. It climbed. It banked out to the left the way you'd been told it would. The lines hummed in your hand like something alive. You were flying a plane. You had built it with your own hands on your mum's kitchen table and now it was in the air and you were flying it. And then you pulled the handle a fraction too hard, the way every kid does the first time, and the nose came up too far and the plane hung there for half a second like it was thinking about it. And then it stalled and dropped straight down into the couch grass nose first with a crunch you felt in your stomach. The prop shattered. The undercarriage folded flat. One wingtip buried itself in the dirt. And the Taipan, still bolted to what was left of the firewall, kept right on running, screaming away on its side in the grass, because a Taipan Tyro does not know how to stop just because you have crashed the aeroplane around it. Nothing stops a Taipan mid-run. Not a nose-first landing, not the dirt in the intake, not an embarrassed 10-year-old standing over the wreckage with the handle still in his hand. Your dad walked over and crouched down and reached in and gave the compression screw a flick to kill it, and the silence that followed was almost louder than the engine had been. He picked up what was left of the plane. He turned it over once. And then he looked up at you and said, "We'll fix it Sunday." 2 words shorter than the American version of this story, and somehow it meant exactly the same thing. You spent that week gluing the wingtip and steaming the fuselage straight and hunting through the shop for a new prop, and the following Saturday you were back behind the scout hall, and this time the plane went round once, then twice, then 5 times, then you lost count, spinning in the middle of the circle until you were dizzy and grinning and the Taipan never once faltered, screaming its flat little scream round and round while your dad leaned on the fence with a cup of tea going cold in his hand. And you did not know it yet, but that was the best afternoon of your childhood. And it would take you another 40 years to understand that. The smell. Every Australian who ever ran a diesel model engine remembers the smell, and it is not the same smell as the glow engines the American kids ran. Ether. Kerosene. A thread of castor oil underneath it all. It came out of the fuel bottle sharp enough to sting, and it hung around the exhaust in a fine blue haze that drifted across the oval and settled on your shirt and your hands and stayed there for the rest of the day no matter how many times your mum made you wash up before tea. It was not a pleasant smell by any reasonable measure. It was sharp and chemical and it made your eyes water if you leaned too close to the exhaust stack. And it was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best smells of your entire childhood, because it meant Saturday, it meant your dad was outside with you, it meant something you had built with your own hands was about to come alive in your fist. You can smell it right now if you close your eyes. 50 years on, you can still smell it. The country show. If you grew up anywhere with a model aero club within cooey of your town, chances are you saw a Taipan-powered plane fly at the local agricultural show. Not Disneyland. Not Tomorrowland. A roped-off square of mown grass next to the woodshop and the poultry pavilion, with a bloke in a check shirt standing in the middle spinning a control line plane round and round while the crowd from the sideshow alley drifted over to watch, drawn in by that hard flat buzz cutting clean through the noise of the generators and the showbag stalls. There was no light show. There was no Tomorrowland budget. There was a length of rope, a mown circle, and a control line pilot who had learned everything he knew flying a Taipan behind his own family scout hall 20 years earlier. The local club would run demonstrations between the woodshop and the grand parade, looping and rolling and sometimes flying 2 planes at once with 2 pilots standing back to back, and every kid at the show pressed up against that rope with a fairy floss in one hand, and every one of them walked out of that show gate afterwards knowing exactly what they wanted for their birthday. Those club stands started disappearing from the show circuit through the 80s, not all at once, just one show at a time, one committee at a time, until a generation of kids grew up going to the same show every year and never once saw a model plane in the air at all. And it was not only the shows. Country footy ovals hosted the same demonstrations on quiet Sunday mornings, a handful of club members turning up with a boot full of engines and fuel cans, laying out a circle of string in the middle of the ground before the seniors game, and half the town's kids would drift over from the canteen to watch, still holding their meat pies, standing 3 deep around the rope with the smell of ether drifting across the grass and mixing with the smell of the sausage sizzle. Somebody's uncle always seemed to know somebody who flew, and that was usually how you ended up standing at that rope in the first place, not because you'd read about it anywhere, but because your Uncle Ray or your mate's older brother had a Taipan in a box under his bed and was willing to show you what it could do if you turned up on the right Sunday. The price of admission. The Taipan Tyro cost a few dollars. Not nothing. This was still real money to a kid whose whole income was a paper round and the odd bit of lawn mowing, but it was priced by a man who understood exactly who his customer was. Gordon Burford was not building engines for wealthy hobbyists with disposable income and a workshop full of imported tools. He was building them for kids in country towns and outer suburbs who had never seen an American hobby catalogue in their lives and would not have been able to afford the postage on one if they had. A Taipan Tyro was within reach of an ordinary Australian kid with an ordinary Australian paper round, and that was not an accident. That was the entire design philosophy. Cheap enough for the kid, tough enough to survive him, and precise enough that it would run first flip every single time once you'd learn the knack of the compression screw. Gordon Burford. You should know who built it. Gordon Burford was born in Adelaide in 1919, and like a lot of blokes of that generation, the war and everything around it shaped what came next. Model engines from overseas were expensive and hard to get hold of in post-war Australia, shipped in from England or America at a price that put them well out of reach of most families, and Gordon looked at that gap and decided he'd just build them here instead. He started small, the way these things always start, and by the 50s he was producing his own engines under his own name, first as the Sabre, until a legal letter from an American aircraft manufacturer over the name forced him to rename the range, and that's how the Taipan was born, named after one of the deadliest snakes on the continent, because Gordon Burford wanted you to know exactly what you were dealing with. Through the 50s, 60s, and 70s his little South Australian workshop turned out one design after another, diesels and glow engines, sport motors, and racing motors, engines that ended up in the hands of kids from Perth to Cairns who had never met each other and never would, all of them united by the same flat little buzz coming out of the same grey crackle finish crankcase. His son Peter joined the business as an apprentice machinist and worked his way up to running the plant. Every Australian modeller who grew up in the 60s and 70s either owned a Taipan or knew someone who did. It was that close to universal. Gordon Burford died in 2010, 90 years old, having spent the best part of his life building a machine simple enough for a 10-year-old to master and tough enough to survive him doing it badly the first dozen times. The model shop. You have to talk about the shop, because there is no version of this story that works without it. Before eBay, before the internet, before you could have anything you wanted delivered to your door in 2 days, there was a narrow little shop on the main street with a bell over the door and a smell of dope and balsa dust that hit you the second you walked in. The bloke behind the counter knew you. He knew your dad. He knew every kid within 5 kilometers who'd ever bought a control line handle off him. And he knew exactly what you were going to ask before you asked it. He'd come round from behind the counter and crouch down next to you at the glass case. And when you told him what you were flying, he'd already have an opinion about your needle valve setting and your fuel mix and whether you were winding that compression screw down too far. He was not selling you an engine. He was inducting you into something. He was the last stop on the same chain that ran all the way back to Gordon Burford's own workshop, and when that shop's roller door came down for the last time sometime in the 80s or 90s, whenever it happened in your town, it took a piece of every kid who'd ever walked through that door with it, whether they knew it at the time or not. Finding your father's engine. You found it the same way most people find these things, going through the shed after he was gone. You were somewhere north of 50 by then, your own kids long past the age you were when you first flicked that prop, and you were working your way through decades of paint tins and coffee jars full of odd screws and the sort of things a man keeps for reasons only he understood, when you found a battered cardboard box wedged behind a stack of roof tile offcuts on the top shelf. And there it was, grey crackle finish gone dark with old oil. Compression screw still in place. Prop still on it. One blade nicked from some crash you no longer remembered the details of. You turn it over in your hand and flick the prop with your finger out of pure habit, and you felt it. The compression still there, still tight, still ready, 50 years on. That engine would start. You knew it the second you felt that resistance under your finger. 50 years of sitting in a cardboard box on a dusty shelf, and it was still willing to run if you gave it the chance, and you stood there in your father's shed holding a machine he had once held, feeling him standing next to you the exact same way he had stood next to you behind the Scout Hall in 1974, and you understood that some part of him was always going to live inside that little grey engine, ready to start on the third flip, for as long as anybody bothered to keep it. The world moved on. Radio control took over through the late 70s and into the 80s, and it is not hard to understand why. No more spinning in dizzy circles on the end of two lines. A radio set let a kid fly wherever he liked, loop and roll and land wherever he pleased, and the excitement of that was hard for a control line plane to compete with. Then came the video games, Space Invaders in the arcades and Atari on the telly at home, and a generation of kids who might once have spent their Saturday afternoons at the kitchen table with dope and balsa dust started spending them in front of a screen instead, and nobody can really blame them for it. That is simply what happened. Electric motors arrived too, cheaper and cleaner and safer, with no ether, no compression screw, no smell at all really, and a whole generation of parents breathed a quiet sigh of relief at that. The model shops closed one by one as the trade dried up. Gordon Burford's own production wound down through the 80s and 90s, the workshop that had once turned out engines by the thousand reduced to a fraction of what it once was, until eventually it stopped altogether, leaving behind decades worth of grey crackle finish engines scattered through sheds and drawers and cardboard boxes across the entire country, most of them never run again, all of them still capable of it. The engine is still out there in your shed right now. You know it is. Behind the paint tins, or in the bottom of your dad's old toolbox, or in a coffee jar with a couple of loose props and a fuel line gone hard and brittle with age. You have not looked at it in years, maybe decades, but it is there, and if you took it down tonight and gave that compression screw a couple of careful turns and flicked the prop with your finger, there is a very good chance it would cough, catch, and settle into that same hard flat buzz it made behind the Scout Hall half a century ago. Because that is what a Taipan does. It starts. It runs. It survives crashes and decades and neglect and the passing of the man who first showed you how to flick that prop, and it outlasts nearly everything except the memory of the Saturday afternoon you built it together at the kitchen table, with dope drying on the newspaper and the smell of ether just starting to fill up the room. If your old man gave you a Taipan Tyro, tell me what year it was. If you can still smell the ether when you close your eyes, tell me where you grew up. If you crashed it on the first flight and he said we'll fix it Sunday, tell me what happened next. And if that little grey engine is sitting in a box in your shed right now and you're thinking about going out there to check on it, go and check. I'll still be here when you get back. I read every single comment.